Most people think of spending in simple terms. You pay $5 for a coffee, you receive a coffee, and the transaction feels complete. The money is gone, the product is consumed, and life moves on. On the surface, this seems harmless because $5 feels insignificant. It is small enough to avoid serious thought, small enough to bypass internal resistance, and small enough to feel almost invisible inside a modern economy where digital payments make spending frictionless. That is precisely why small spending deserves more attention than most people give it. Large purchases trigger analysis. A car purchase creates hesitation. Buying a house demands planning. Expensive electronics force comparison and research. Small purchases rarely create that same psychological friction. They slip through unnoticed because the brain treats them as trivial. But money does not behave according to emotional perception. Money behaves according to mathematics. And mathematics treats repetition very differently than the human brain does. This creates one of the most overlooked financial blind spots in modern life. The problem with a $5 coffee is usually not the coffee itself. The problem is the hidden economic system surrounding habitual spending and the opportunity cost attached to repeated consumption. To understand this, we need to shift from transaction thinking to systems thinking. Transaction thinking asks a simple question. Did this purchase cost $5? Systems thinking asks a deeper question. What financial trajectory did this purchase reinforce? That difference changes everything. When someone buys a coffee once per month, the financial effect is negligible. But most habitual purchases are not isolated events. They are recurring behaviors embedded inside routines. Morning coffee, food delivery, impulse shopping, digital subscriptions, convenience purchases, and countless small upgrades all share a common trait. They repeat. And repeated behavior creates patterns. Patterns create systems. Systems create outcomes. This is where behavioral economics becomes important. Human beings naturally discount the future. Psychologists call this present bias. We place disproportionately high value on immediate pleasure and disproportionately low value on future reward. In simple terms, the brain tends to prefer pleasure now over benefit later, even when later benefit is mathematically larger. This bias made sense historically. Immediate resources were often necessary for survival. Delayed rewards carried uncertainty. Our brains evolved in environments where short-term consumption often mattered more than long-term accumulation. Modern financial systems exploit this tendency extremely well. Delivery apps remove friction. One-click purchases eliminate waiting. Digital wallets reduce payment pain. Subscription models hide recurring costs. Marketing systems constantly encourage immediate gratification. As a result, spending becomes easier while future cost becomes less visible. This brings us back to the $5 coffee. Suppose someone buys a $5 coffee every weekday. That is $25 per week. Roughly $100 per month. $1,200 per year. At first glance, $1,200 annually may not sound life-changing. Many people stop their analysis there. They think in annual consumption terms, not long-term capital terms. But capital behaves differently from cash. Cash spent disappears. Capital invested compounds. That distinction is the entire story. Imagine that instead of spending that money, the person invested $100 every month into a diversified long-term portfolio averaging 7% annual growth. The math becomes interesting. After 1 year, the amount is modest. After 5 years, it becomes noticeable. After 10 years, the growth accelerates. After 20 years, the compounding becomes substantial. After 30 years, something surprising happens. That coffee habit may represent well over $100,000 in future capital, depending on returns and consistency. This is the first hidden cost of spending. The visible cost is $5. The invisible cost is future compounded capital. This is why every purchase effectively has two prices. The first price is what you pay today. The second price is what that money could have become. Most people see only the first price. We rarely think in future value terms because the human brain struggles with exponential growth. Linear thinking feels intuitive. Exponential thinking does not. If you save $100, you feel like you gained $100. If that $100 compounds for decades, it may become many multiples of that amount. The future value feels abstract because it does not produce immediate emotional impact. This explains why opportunity cost is psychologically difficult to appreciate. Opportunity cost is invisible by nature. You never physically see the life path that did not happen. You see the coffee. You do not see the portfolio that could have existed. You experience the short-term reward. You never directly experience the alternative future. This invisibility creates massive behavioral distortions. Historically, wealth accumulation has often depended less on extraordinary earnings and more on repeated allocation decisions. Across economic history, individuals who consistently directed surplus toward productive assets often accumulated disproportionate financial resilience over time. Not because they avoided all consumption. Because they understood trade-offs. Trade-offs are the foundation of economics. Every dollar allocated somewhere cannot simultaneously be allocated elsewhere. This sounds obvious, yet people routinely violate this principle psychologically. They treat small spending as harmless because each individual transaction appears isolated. But isolated transactions rarely remain isolated. They become habits. Habits become identity. Identity becomes lifestyle. Lifestyle becomes financial structure. And financial structure determines long-term optionality. Optionality is one of the most important concepts in personal finance. Optionality means having choices. The ability to reduce work. The ability to change careers. The ability to survive disruptions. The ability to say no. The ability to create time freedom. Small repeated spending may seem unrelated to these outcomes. But over decades, allocation decisions quietly shape optionality. This does not mean every coffee purchase is irrational. That would be an oversimplification. Money exists to support life, not merely accumulate endlessly. The real question is not whether you should buy coffee. The real question is whether spending is intentional or automatic. There is a major psychological difference between conscious consumption and unconscious consumption. Conscious consumption says, I value this enough to exchange future capital for present enjoyment. Unconscious consumption says, this is just what I do. That difference matters enormously. Automatic spending often bypasses reflection. It becomes part of identity and routine. Once spending becomes routine, questioning it feels uncomfortable because habits feel normal. Psychologists call this normalization. Repeated behavior stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like baseline existence. This is one reason wealth gaps widen over time. The gap is not always driven by dramatic differences in intelligence, talent, or salary. Often it is driven by systems. One person builds systems that automatically direct surplus into assets. Another builds systems that automatically direct surplus into consumption. Both feel normal. But their long-term outcomes diverge dramatically. The modern economy strongly rewards consumption behavior. Entire industries depend on maximizing consumer spending frequency. Businesses study friction carefully because friction reduces spending. If pain feels harder, people spend less. If pain feels effortless, spending rises. This is why digital finance changed behavior. Cash created pain. Physical cash leaving your wallet created a tangible emotional signal. Digital spending softens that signal. Tap, click, confirm. Transaction complete. No physical loss is felt. This reduced friction increases spending frequency, especially for small purchases. Again, the $5 coffee is not the villain. It is the symbol. It represents a broader economic truth. Small recurring spending often matters more than occasional large spending because recurrence creates compounding in reverse. Most people understand positive compounding. Fewer understand negative compounding. Negative compounding happens when repeated consumption continuously removes capital that could otherwise generate future returns. Just as investments can compound upward, spending habits can compound downward. This means bad financial habits do not merely cost what was spent. They also cost all future growth attached to what was spent. That makes recurring spending more expensive than it appears. There is another psychological layer here. Status signaling. Humans are social creatures. Spending often communicates identity. Brands, products, routines, and lifestyle choices frequently function as signals. They communicate belonging, taste, success, and aspiration. A premium coffee may not just be coffee. It may symbolize productivity, sophistication, routine, comfort, status. This makes spending harder to evaluate rationally because the purchase includes emotional meaning. People rarely spend money only for utility. They spend for feeling. This is why financial behavior cannot be understood through mathematics alone. Psychology always matters. The best financial systems account for both. Pure deprivation rarely works. Extreme restriction often triggers burnout, resentment, or binge spending. Sustainable wealth building usually comes from alignment. Spending intentionally. Saving consistently. Investing automatically. Reducing unconscious leakage. That phrase is important. Unconscious leakage. Most wealth erosion does not happen through dramatic failure. It happens quietly. Subscription by subscription. Impulse by impulse buy. Convenience fee by convenience fee. Delivery charge by delivery charge. Small leakages create large long-term effects. Imagine a bucket filling with water. Large holes are obvious. Small holes are harder to notice. Yet enough small holes can prevent the bucket from ever filling. Financial life often works the same way. People search for huge breakthroughs. Bigger salary. Bigger investment return. Bigger opportunity. Meanwhile, the quieter determinant of wealth may be the system governing daily cash flow. Where does money go automatically? That question often reveals more than income does. Many high earners remain financially fragile because inflow is high but outflow is nearly as high. Many moderate earners build strong wealth because surplus is consistently preserved and invested. Again, the difference is often invisible. This brings us to the deeper lesson behind the $5 coffee. The real issue is not coffee. It is awareness. If every recurring expense forced a question, financial behavior would change dramatically. That question is simple. If I repeat this for 10 years, what system am I building? That single question transforms spending decisions. Because you stop evaluating purchases as isolated events. You begin evaluating them as behavioral trajectories. And trajectories matter far more than moments. One purchase rarely changes life. 10,000 repeated purchases can. This shift changes identity. Instead of seeing yourself as someone making daily spending decisions, you begin seeing yourself as someone designing a financial system. That mindset changes everything. System designers think differently. They remove friction from good behavior. They add friction to bad behavior. They automate investing. They make spending visible. They track recurring costs. They build around intentionality instead of impulse. Over time, this creates something powerful. Control. Not perfect control. Not absolute predictability. But meaningful influence over long-term outcomes. And that is ultimately the point. Financial freedom rarely arrives through one massive decision. It usually emerges from thousands of repeated allocation choices made over years. Some choices move capital toward future freedom. Others move capital toward immediate consumption. Neither is inherently right or wrong. The key is awareness. Because once you understand that every dollar has both a present price and a future price, spending stops feeling trivial. It becomes strategic. And when enough strategic decisions compound over time, something subtle begins to happen. Your financial future changes. Not overnight. Not dramatically at first. Quietly. Gradually. Then all at once. So the next time you buy a $5 coffee, the question is not whether the coffee is worth $5. The deeper question is this. What future am I buying or delaying with this decision? And once you begin asking that question consistently, you stop thinking like a consumer. You begin thinking like a capital allocator. That is where financial psychology starts to change. And often, that is where wealth begins.